Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 432 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have this small crew here this week. Crim is away, was at MagicCon Minneapolis, but we are joined from all the way around the world this week by Richard, the owner of MTG Goldfish. Richard, how are things this fine Monday?
Hey Seth, doing well. It actually is Monday over here. I am in China. It is midnight. I feel like I'm on Crim time. I don't know what's going on. I feel like I need to go to sleep now. But there's a lot of news this week, so we're ready to rock and roll.
Oh yeah, this is going to be a big and very interesting cast. So topics for today. There was a Standard Pro Tour yesterday. We wanted to talk about that a little bit. There was a huge announcement about the future of Standard and kind of the nuts and bolts of the format, how it actually works. We wanted to get into that. There's some alchemy news that's related to the Standard news. There's Aftermath spoilers. There's a new Secret Lair Commander deck. There's the ring mechanic from the Lord of the Rings set was finally revealed. So we have a ton to talk about. Before we jump into it though, a reminder that today's show is brought to you by Card Conduit. In Card Conduit, they are the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. If you ever get tired of all the hassles that go into buy listing your cards, Card Conduit lets you skip them with their curated service. You can send in as many cards as you want with a buy list value of $1 or more and pay just a 5% service fee. And if you want to do a little work, you can use this sorted service where you list and sort your cards in advance and pay just a 2% fee. And no matter which one you choose, you're going to get a detailed report with the results and a fast payment once your order is processed. And you can even get another 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/MTGGoldfish. Card Conduit, they are the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thank you so much to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And let's talk some Magic, and let's start with there's so much big. I was going to say the big news of the week, but really there's like so much news this week. Let's start with the Pro Tour. We had our second Paper Pro Tour since the return of Paper Pro Tours this past weekend. It was this standard format. In the end, it was Nathan Sauer taking home another win, which is absolutely ridiculous. Nathan's been on one of the craziest heaters. I believe it is. He won a Pro Tour, finished second at Worlds, won a Pro Tour, which is like an almost unprecedented streak of runs for 3 tournaments in a row. So a huge shout out to him for just crushing it. Richard, what actually went down at this Pro Tour? What does Standard look like at the highest levels?
No idea, Seth. I didn't watch the Pro Tour. So can you tell me which Fable of the Mirror Breaker deck won?
Okay, so yes, it was, of course, a Fable of the Mirror Breaker deck that won, which is not a surprise. Yes, nailed it, Richard. Well done. It was a super Rakdos and Grixis heavy Pro Tour. I think we were adding up the metagame percentages, and if you kind of lump Grixis and Rakdos together, which I don't know, may or may not be fair, like they share a lot of cards or some slight differences, those two decks were 50% of the meta, and then if you start tossing in other Black X decks like Esper, it was 75% of the meta. So it was pretty clear one of those decks was going to be favored to win. The build that actually won was, I guess you would say, Rakdos mid-range. It's not a Reanimator build. It's kind of typical Sheoldreds and Blood Tithe Harvesters and Invoke Despairs. The new card, I guess, is Chandra Hopesbeacon, which is just a couple copies for value, more or less. But it is more or less what you would think of as a Rakdos mid-range deck that we've seen in Standard for quite a while now. Bankbusters and Fables and so forth. And really a big chunk of the top 8 was those decks. Some of them are splashing Atraxa to try to reanimate it. Some of them are not. Some of them have a copy or two of Light Up the Night to combo with Chandra. Some of them don't. But really, I think it was 5 Rakdos/Grixis decks in the top 8. 1 Soldiers deck, 1 mono white. Actually, not exactly mono white. It was mono white mid-range splashing for black for Breach the Multiverse. So almost like the Atraxa deck we were talking about, or almost like the Tally deck we were talking about a week or two ago. Basically the same theory, but instead of splashing for a Tally, you're splashing for Breach the Multiverse. And then 1 ramp deck made it in that was just ramping into Atraxa with green cards, which was neat to see. So Richard, what do you make of this metagame? Like, this kind of ties into our next topic that we're going to get into. What do you think of the health of Standard? So it's so hard to really discuss because on one hand, I feel like Standard has really interactive games, which are kind of fun. I still enjoy playing them. On the other hand, we keep seeing this Grixis slash Rakdos shell get better and better. We're like hoping March of the Machines might change that, but really, based on what we saw at this Pro Tour, March of the Machines was more or less a flop. Like, there is not really much from March of the Machines that is making a huge impact. Is Standard healthy, or what do you think?
Surely. There were so many powerful cards in March of the Machine. Something had to break out. Cards are too strong, Seth. Fable's too strong. Shieldred's too strong. Bloodtithe Harvester's too strong. We already ate the Meat Hook Massacre banning a long time ago, and I don't know. They're mid-range piles. Like, you ban one card, they just slot in the next best mid-range thing and go to town. So I don't know. I think Standard, gameplay-wise, is in a good place. But it's so boring. It's like the same Standard we've been playing for months and months and months. And not only that, the games take forever. So when it first happened, it's like, oh, cool, right? It's like, this is awesome Standard. But like how many sets have come and gone now, and like nothing has changed in Standard essentially. I think that is the problematic part here, where March of the Machine comes, like nothing happens. Brothers War, like nothing happens. So I think that's the disappointing thing. None of the new mechanics have done anything. We're still just playing mid-range piles. Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting but boring at the same time. It's interesting for short spurts, but it's kind of sad that the metagame hasn't really changed, or like nothing's really happened. Like, it's still Rakdos. We've talked about Rakdos for like months now.
Yeah, I feel like, at some point the replayability starts to suffer, like, even if the games are really good. Like, I love playing Civilization, one of my favorite games, but Civilization is a game that takes a long time to complete, and after I play Civilization for a while, it's not that Civilization gets bad or the actual underlying mechanics get bad, but eventually I'm like, all right, I kind of want to do something else. Like, I can only do so much of the same thing before I want to shake it up a little bit, and I feel like maybe that's where Standard is ending up, because if you look at these deck lists, really, in all honesty, the Grixis slash Rakdos shell, they have not really gotten a ton of updates in a long time. Like, if you look at the core of these decks, it's really cards that are over a year old at this point. Like, sure, Atali and Atraxa, I guess, added a new finishing plan to some of those builds. Those are, like, somewhat recent cards. I guess Cruelty of Grix came out in, Domineer United, which was, I guess, almost a year ago at this point, but that's one of the most recent cards to show up. So I feel like we went through, like, 3 set releases in a row, or 4 set releases in a row, with nothing really changing. Like, nothing's really changed since last rotation. So I don't know. I was getting to the point where I'm hopeful we'll get a shakeup, and I guess this kind of leads into our second really big topic, because it comes into play with what we're discussing now. So I was thinking, all right, so yes, the metagame Super Grixis-y or Rakdos-y, yes, the same handful of really good mid-range cards, Fables and Graveyard Trespassers and Invoke Despairs and Reckoner Bankbusters and Bloodtithe Harvesters, those cards are everywhere. They're more than half of the metagame at this point. But we're going to have rotation in September. We're closing in on it. And normally the way Standard works for me is Standard is like, it's really fun. It sets release and you do new things. And then eventually you get to the summer and you're kind of like, okay, like, it's solved. We're waiting for rotation. That'll shake things up. We'll have a new format. Well, Wizards announced yesterday, no rotation this year. They're changing the way that Standard actually works. And what they want to do essentially is, traditionally Standard is 2 years worth of sets. The most recent 2 years of cards are in Standard, and then once a year in September, a year's worth of sets drop off. The change Wizards is making is they want Standard to be 3 years worth of sets rather than 2, and to get this new schedule working, it essentially means skipping rotation for the year. So in the middle of yesterday's Super Rakdos-y, Super Fable the Mirror Break-y Pro Tour, Wizards announced, hey, guess what, everyone? No rotation this year. All those cards that you're complaining about in our Twitch chat, the Fables and the Invoke Despairs, they're going to be around until September of 2024, because we need to skip rotation to get this new 3-year cadence going. Richard, I gotta know, there's so much to dig into with this topic. There's also a secondary article about Alchemy and how Alchemy will not be changing to the new rotation schedule, so it will keep the Standard rotation schedule. Richard, What do you make of, first off, what do you make of this change? Like, Wizards' point here, if you read their article, they had 3 things that they think will improve because of this. One is your standard cards will have more longevity, which I guess if they don't rotate, that kind of is true by default. 2 is it'll allow mechanics and archetypes to be more effectively built over time. Wizards actually shouts out, dropping the block model is hurting this. They gained flexibility, but lost the ability to build on themes and mechanics. If you got more years worth of sets in standard, I guess theoretically you can build on that more. And then it'll also let them make stronger tools to create environments where decks with more colors and mechanics like green-white toxic or blue-white soldiers will exist more and be less mid-range focused. So basically, your cards last longer. They can build off archetypes more because there will be more time. And in theory, they think they can make less mid-range decks by pushing decks like Toxic or Soldiers more with this new setup. Richard, what do you make of this?
We're about a month too late for April Fools. What?
Yeah.
Like, I was actually thinking the other day, like, we should go to, like, 1 year rotation. Like, we should go, like, 18 months or whatever. This has gotta be... I don't want to say it, but I have to say it, like, the dumbest thing ever. Like, I don't know. Like, what are they thinking? Like, okay, let's try to break it down, right? So they obviously want your cards to last longer because they don't want you to buy standard cards and be like, oh, no, they're going to rotate. How are they going to do this? Imagine 3 years of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. What are they going to do? They're going to aggressively ban, right? They're going to, like, guarantee next week Fable's getting banned. Like, basically guaranteed, right? Maybe Shuldred, maybe Blood Tithe Harvester. But essentially, instead of rotating every 2 years, you got to play the every week, like, is my deck going to get banned game, which will definitely happen. More sets just leads to more mid-rangey crap, right? Like, you know, when they release a set, they're like, okay, this is the Toxic set. And then every set after that does not have Toxic cards in it. How does that deck get any better? It doesn't, right? What actually gets better is just like random mid-range piles. They can just grab the best card from each set and then go to town. So I think this makes it worse. Like, if you have any strong synergy decks, like, as the sets keep adding in, you don't get any more power, but all the other decks get power. So that makes it worse. I really don't want to play with Fable for 3 years. I don't want to see cards being banned every other week to, like, shake up the meta, because that also makes my standard deck irrelevant. You didn't mention this, but Alchemy is keeping at 2 year rotation. So they're replacing standard with Alchemy on Arena, which is also bad. Like, I don't know, Seth. Do you believe in this change at all? I see nothing but, like, terrible changes here.
So, okay, if you want good news out of this changes. So I think the good news is Wizards actually publicly said that they care about competitive paper play, which is something we have been wondering about for a while. Like, remember a year ago or 2 years ago, we were, like, honestly wondering if Wizards had any desire or will to even try to make paper play work for, like, something like Standard. So I think there's good news in that Wizards is saying, we actually want to make this work. We do care about paper Standard. We want to see it be successful. So I think that's good news. They also said, well, this is the first of what are going to be several steps to improve Standard. It's not ending here. We're going to be doing more. Whenever I hear this from Wizards, like, yes, it's good. I'm glad. And I do think they need to do more if this is going to work. But I always kind of take it with a grain of salt, because there's just been so many situations where we hear this and then it's like a year later before we hear anything. I remember, like, when they were bringing organized play back, I was like, oh, we're going to have a ton of news soon. Don't worry. And then 6 months go by, and then 9 months go by. And then finally, like, a year later, we hear something, or like, oh, don't worry, we're going to let you know about the Hall of Fame coming back. And then 4 years later, I still, unless I missed it somehow, I still don't believe we've heard anything about that coming back. So I always am a little skeptical when I hear, oh, don't worry, like, more good stuff is on the way, because I just don't know how long that's going to take. I will say, this is exactly the opposite of what I would do if I was trying to fix Standard. Like, I I have for a while wanted Standard to change more often, and I view staleness as one of Standard's biggest problems. Like, I view the problem, or one of them, to be that, you have to play these same handful of cards over and over again. The best times in Standard are when a new set releases and people are trying new things, when rotation happens and people are trying new decks. The worst times in Standard are when you're playing against the same cards you've played against half the time for the last 6 months, and that just keeps going, and I feel like this change makes it worse. So I'm willing to try to give Wizards the benefit of the doubt. I don't know, how much of this do you think is just us being super enfranchised, Richard? Because that's the one thing that I think is like kind of valid criticism. How about this? Like, so for me, this change makes Standard worse because I play a ton of Magic, and I play against Grixis midrange or Rakdos, I don't even know, 40 times a week or something absurd. Like, and it gets really, really boring. What about for a more casual player who like goes to F&M once a week and plays 4 matches of Magic? Sure, maybe they play against Grixis twice out of those 4 matches because that's the math and the metagame percentages. But really, then they go and like, do whatever for the weekend and go work for the week. And then the next Friday they go again, and sure, you play Grixis twice, but whatever. Like, I played 4 matches of Magic, 2 are Grixis. What do I care? Is it that we're like super enfranchised and just play so much Magic that this change is bad for us, but it's actually good for other people and we're like missing it because we're so enfranchised?
Nah, Seth, like 3 years, long time. Isn't that like before COVID?
Yeah.
like just think about that for a second. Like, COVID's hitting, you're playing Fable the Mirror Breaker. Like 3 years later, you're still playing that crap. Like, even if you play once a week, that's a lot of Fable. I don't know that you want to play that much Fable, Seth. Like, 3 years is a very long time. I think even for the non-franchise player, and I think for the non-franchise player, it's a lot worse because every week they come, something has been banned, something has been rotated. They want to log on to Magic Arena and play to do something, but they're playing Alchemy and they're confused. Like, I don't know. I don't buy it. Like, I think Wizards is trying to save paper Magic, but Arena has kind of like was the first like big blow against, and the second blow is like they're pushing everyone to Commander, and then the third blow is like, what is the point of Standard? I played Pioneer the other day. It feels just like Standard, Seth. Like, I don't know what the point of these formats are anymore. When the power level is so high, all your new Standard cards permeate into all the other quote unquote non-rotating formats, and you're just playing the same stuff everywhere. So why play the thing that rotates and costs you more money when you can just play Rakdos midrange and Pioneer and like be kind of guaranteed that your deck never changes, right? I don't know. Like, it's weird that Wizards got too greedy and now they're trying to fix it, right? They got greedy by basically rotating all your non-rotating formats. Modern with Modern Horizons, Commander with all the Commander supplementals, Vintage and Legacy keep changing. And then people start playing that because they're always new and shiny, and then no one plays Standard anymore. And they push everyone to Arena. Everyone's on Arena now. Now they're like, oh, come back to paper. Like, I don't know. They got to like kind of rethink this overall strategy here of like how they use their players and the money, because I think they're just panicking and like doing random stuff. The way I would fix Standard would be lots of in-game events and promos. So like reward people immensely for going to F&M. Like, back in the day, they gave you like free lightning bolts and stuff like that kind of stuff, like actual free chase cards, and just make Standard cheaper. Like, really like drive down the prices. Don't put Fable at Mythic, put Fable at Uncommon or something. Maybe not Uncommon, right? But put it at Rare. Push all the value into your serialized cards or whatever, right? But like, make a Standard deck $50 instead of what it's traditionally at, like 200 to 300, maybe 400. There are like many ways to do it, or add a code for Arena for every paper pack you buy or whatever, right? Like, there are many ways to do this, and none of these involve playing children for 3 years, Seth. I don't know what they're thinking, really. Like, 3 years? Like, really?
Yeah, like, I'm worried that either they have to aggressively ban stuff to have like banning rotations essentially, or this could actually end up hurting Standard, because I think you're right. I guess even if you're casual, you're gonna get sick of those cards eventually. I guess I get sick of them quicker than most people because I play more Magic than most people, but I think it will eventually end up being a problem for more casual players who don't play as many games as well. I also think you hit on a pretty funny point that like, Wizards really did this to themselves. Like, they spent the last several years uh, getting rid of GPs, getting rid of organized play in paper, like, and this was pre-pandemic, so this wasn't just like the pandemic shut things down. This was stuff they were doing before the pandemic, but they got rid of GPs, which was one of the biggest reasons to build a standard deck. They pulled support from organized play. They started doing command fests and pushing people really heavily to like get into commander. And now, after like taking all these steps to minimize paper standard and support other formats, now they're like, oh no, like we gotta somehow backtrack and like make this go the other direction. But they already took so many steps to get people to play commander, get people to play pioneer, to minimize standard, to minimize organized play. It might just be too little too late. And I think one thing they mentioned is like, okay, so we knew this was a problem, so we've been asking people about it and listening to everyone's feedback. And apparently the feedback that they've gotten is one of the big reasons people don't play as much standard or don't get into standard is it's too expensive and the cards rotate, essentially. And it seems like Wizards really focused in on the rotation part of this, which I don't really see how that can be the problem, considering our absolute peak of standard, when standard was booming and the most popular format, and we were having 4,000 person GPs and so forth, like a decade ago, or even like 7 years ago or whatever. It was the same rotation cadence. It's not like they did something different. We know standard has been super popular with rotation like this. I think that you are 100% right that the real problem is standard is just too expensive. They focused on the like, oh, it rotates too quickly and that's making it too expensive, when I think the actual problem is the cards just cost too much money. I was looking at our metagame page, Richard, and comparing standard to pioneer, and I was like absolutely shocked. If you have $400 to spend, you can get a tier standard deck, or you can pretty much take your pick of a tier pioneer deck. If that's the choice, why would you pick standard? Whether it rotates in 2 years or 3 years, why wouldn't you build Mono Green Devotion in Pioneer, or Rakdos Midrange in Pioneer, or Azorius Control in Pioneer, that'll theoretically last you the next 10 years with some updates, compared to a standard deck, whether it rotates in 2 years or 3 years, and then you also have Commander on top of that. It's the same choice. If you have $400 to spend on a paper Magic deck, are you better off buying Rakdos in standard that you can use for X amount of time, whether it's 2 years or 3 years? Or are you better off buying a commander deck that you can literally play forever? Even if Wizards folds and stops supporting Magic altogether, you're still going to find people that want to play that commander deck with you. Are you going to find people that are going to play standard with you? No, like that's just not going to happen. So I feel like the real solution to this is not changing rotation. It's making standard cheaper. It's lowering the rarity of cards so they're not so expensive. It's not, whatever, printing the cards that'll be too expensive. People have suggested knocking the dual lands down to uncommon, and Wizards will never go for this, but that would very much change the problem. If your mana base was uncommon and you could get your mana base for $10 instead of $100 or $150 or $200, that by itself would go a long way towards solving the problem. So I think there's a problem that needs to be solved, a problem that was mostly created by the decisions Wizards has made over the past few years. Like, they created this issue. I just don't see changing the rotation schedule as something that's meaningfully going to change it. And I'm not even sure it does what they want. Like, if the problem is standard is too expensive because of rotation, isn't the need for more bannings even worse for players? Like, I've heard some people be like, oh, this is great, my cards are going to last longer. And I'm like, are they really though? Like, is your Fable of the Mirror Breaker actually going to last longer? Or are you just going to wake up one day and it's going to be banned by surprise? At least with rotation, you can prepare for it. You know it's coming. Okay, 6 months from now, my Shieldred's going to rotate. Am I keeping it for Commander or Pioneer? Am I selling it or trading it to get cards for next year? With bannings, you can't prepare at all. It just happens at random. So I don't know. I'm with you on this one, Richard. I really don't see it.
It's that time again. It's time for me to talk about Marvel Snap. I've stopped playing Marvel Snap, Seth. Do you know why?
Ooh, why?
So Snap has like in my opinion, a really dumb release system where when they add new cards, they basically make them super expensive. And as time goes by, they become cheaper and cheaper. And what that essentially means is every time they release a new card, it has like zero effect on the metagame. Because like no one can afford or like is willing to pay for that new card. And so the metagame is actually super stale. And the way they fix this is by constantly rebalancing existing cards. And that becomes very annoying because like you just wake up and you're like, my cards do random things. And then I've played like hundreds of games with my cards doing this one thing, and now it does this other thing, and now I'm all messed up and it's all weird. And I just didn't like that play pattern where this card just did something different the next day, and like that was their way of like fixing the metagame. And a long rotation is essentially the same thing, right? Like Snap doesn't have a rotation; it needs a rotation, and we're kind of going in that direction where no rotation, and we'll just ban things to shake up the metagame and unban things. And I don't know. I think that just feels bad, and I don't know. And the other thing that really annoys me is Wizards' term digital first. So Alchemy is keeping on 2-year rotation because they want Alchemy to be a fresh digital format. So they're kind of divorcing it from Standard now. They're not going to move in lockstep. And what that means is like if you play Standard, you can't even test on Arena now. Now you're like like everyone's playing Alchemy or something, right? And like it's all different. And like I don't know, like they have this weird thing that like Arena players are not paper players or something like that. It's like, are you an email first person, Seth? Like you only use emails first, and then there are people that exclusively do letters or something. I don't know, right? Like it's like 2023. Everyone plays digital. Like you should figure out a way to marry them rather than kind of split them aside and try to like milk the most money out of them. So what do you think about this Alchemy change? Like, are they not just like slaying Standard digitally and like forcing everyone into Alchemy? Because Alchemy keeps the 2-year rotation. It will have constant rebalances to fix your fables. What do you think? And they're not going to have any bannings either, right? Like Standard will have bannings and Alchemy will not. So are we all supposed to play Alchemy now and like it?
So I actually was going to bring this up. If I put my tinfoil hat on for a minute, I think you can make an argument, and I don't think it's necessarily true, but I think if you read both of these articles together, the one about Standard and the one about Alchemy, I can see how someone would read that and be like, wow, change is designed to support Alchemy more than it's designed to help Standard. Like it's designed to funnel people into that and actually make it like almost necessary if you're someone who wants to have a fresh metagame and changes. Like the stuff that Standard is supposed to provide in the Magic ecosystem, the format that has rotations and you're always getting new set releases that actually are supposed to impact the meta because there's not that many sets in the format. Now Alchemy is going to be that format, and Standard's going to be, I guess, almost equivalent to old Extended, which they ended up pulling the plug on because it got so hated and unpopular and people didn't like it that they ended up getting rid of it altogether for Modern. So is it unfair to feel like these changes are more about making more people play Alchemy than making more people play Paper Standard?
I don't know. They're trying to make like digital Standard players, they're trying to like take more money out of their pocket and get them to come to FNM. Like you can see exactly their thought process is like fix Standard without affecting how much money every other format or product makes. Like that, like you can tell exactly that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that's gonna happen, right? Because essentially everyone just spent less money on Standard and bought Commander or bought Pioneer or bought Modern or bought, Arena packs, right? And now Wizards trying to figure out like, hey, how do I keep that money while, getting the money from Standard back? And I don't know how they're going to do it. But I don't know.
I also found myself wondering.
It's weird. I'm kind of sad. I feel like this is like the first notch in Magic falling over, right? like they don't know what they're doing. They're like waving around frantically. They're changing Arena and Paper for the worse, I think. And I don't know if they're trying to troll us and like they have some actual master plan that they're not telling us, or I don't know. I refuse to believe. Like I'm gonna put up a poll up. We're gonna put a poll up on Twitter and on YouTube to see what people think about this 3-year rotation. But my guess is it'll be overwhelmingly negative, and I'm not sure how Wizards concluded that this will be a positive change.
Yeah, so I will say the Pro Tour, the coverage was surprisingly good. This is the second Pro Tour that had come back since Paper went on a hiatus during the pandemic and the MPL era. The second one, I didn't get to watch the first one because I was at the Magic Con. This is the first one I actually got to watch, and I was actually blown away by just how much they'd improved the coverage and solved a lot of the issues that had been there in the past. There were cards popping up. You could see the players' faces. There was no huge 20-minute gaps where nothing was going on. So that makes me think that Wizards is serious and does want Paper Standard to do well. So I think just writing it off as being all about alchemy is a little bit silly. I take Wizards at face value when they say they want Paper Standard to succeed. I think they do want Paper Standard to succeed, probably in large part because it's another way you can sell cards. Like you can sell standard cards to people who are playing standard. But I do think they actually want it to succeed. I really question the timing of this announcement in several ways, though. Why announce this now? Why, if you're going to do this, why announce it during a historically lacking in diversity Pro Tour where people are already complaining about seeing Fable so often or Invoke Despair or Shieldred so often? Why announce it now? Why not let rotation happen and then be like, hey, next year, everyone, we're going to make this change with rotation? Why do it when everyone's counting down the days to rotation? I also wonder, would this have gone over better if there was more to it than just rotation changing? Because we had okay, rotation's changing. These cards that you don't like playing against, you're going to have to play against for another 16 months now. And don't worry, cool stuff's coming in the future. Wouldn't it have been better to maybe flesh it out a little bit more and have some of the cool stuff to tell people? Because people are going to be a little bit unhappy about the idea of having to play against Fable for another 16 months. So if you had what if they made it like this? What if this was an announcement? Because my initial reaction to this was just negative and oh my God, I don't want to play against Fable for another 16 months. But then I sort of tried to shift gears and think, okay, how can we make this work? If Wizards is committed to this, even though it's not the change I would make, how can we make the best of this? How can Wizards and the community actually make this a positive or at least less of a negative? And the stuff I was thinking about is maybe more aftermath sets. Maybe you have to have a way to keep standard fresh. Maybe the way to keep it fresh is more of these mini sets. It's going to mean more bannings, right? Those are not a positive, but it's going to have to mean more bannings. Maybe core sets returning so you can add more inner block synergy. Could Wizards have announced more alongside this to make it go over better, you think?
So the plan is that more is coming, but I give that very little stuff because it's probably gonna be underwhelming. Because if it was actually something very exciting, they would just lead with that, right? In my opinion, the way the more would fix it is MPR comes back. If you go to FNM, every 4 FNMs you go to, you get a promo Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Whatever the expensive chase mythic is, you get a Fable Shieldred, and then next month it's a new card. And then so if you grind standard at your FNM, you can eventually build Rakdos midrange for free or something like that. That would be interesting. Or they could go the other way. They could give you free commander cards or something. I don't know but it would have to be rewarding you for showing up at the LGS, even if you don't want to show up at the LGS, right? So if you're I could play Arena. I think I'll play Arena, but oh no, I got to get that last, daily check-in at my FNM so I can actually get that, free $50 card or whatever. So that would actually drive people to stores, I think. But if it was something that exciting, why wouldn't they just say that? Why would they lead with this rotation announcement? So I'm not as optimistic as you said. If it was something actually good, I think they would just say it rather than give us don't worry, trust me, bro, it's coming.
I mean, I don't know if I would go so far as to say I'm optimistic, but I could imagine a world where there could be good announcements that followed this that would make the slower rotation less bad compared to how it feels right now. I feel just announcing it now is the absolute the worst absolute time to do it when everyone's just already talking about how standard is stale and salved, even though the gameplay is good. So okay,
they're gonna ban Fable next week, Seth, guaranteed.
I mean, they have to, right? There's no even argument at this point. I don't see how
What if they don't?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh They'll run a Twitter poll and use that to justify not banning Fable. we asked on Twitter, and it's funny how Twitter matters when it's something Wizards wants to do, but if you're like, hey, like I did a Twitter poll and it shows Alchemy is unpopular, they're like, it doesn't count. I gotta ask you, Richard. So 2 last questions on this, and we gotta hit up a couple other topics. Do you think this will improve Standard? Like, is this going to revitalize Standard in paper? And number 2, related, do you think people are going to migrate to Alchemy now? Like, do you think we're going to see on Arena Alchemy get a boost in popularity from people who want things to change quicker and want the old rotation schedule? Or do you think there's too much crossover between digital players and paper players that the fact that Alchemy now has no real ties to the real world is still going to be too big of a hurdle for people to get over? Basically, does Standard get better and more popular because of this? And does Alchemy get better and more popular because of this, or no?
Yeah, I mean, this just gives me the go-ahead to not follow Standard news now. I'm already pre-biased against Alchemy. Like, they've already ruined it in my eyes, so I can never play it. Like, it's kind of a done deal. And for franchise players, I think that's a very common outlook. So I don't think they're going to switch to Alchemy. And I think the real answer is you just do something else. You just go play Fortnite or something, right? Like, I don't know. Like, realistically, I think you go play Modern or something. Like, you go play Modern Horizons 3, the format, which ironically rotates every 2 years instead of 3 years in Standard now, right?
So,
but you have Pioneer, you have Modern, or you have Commander. Yeah, like, I don't want 3 years of Fable. So yeah. I will just go do anything else. And I also don't want to see bannings every week, because I think that's going to happen as well. Like, if you ban Fable today, what about Invoke Despair? What about Shieldred? What about Blood Tide Harvest? Are you just doing a mini rotate? Are you just gonna ban like the whole Rakdos deck so that, you know, Grixis and all those decks go with it and you won't see this deck anymore? Like, how can they approach this banning? But
yeah,
like,
it's
when you're not like you're banning for diversity or something. It's weird. Like, they're like, what's the criteria now? It's not like, oh, this deck is so oppressive. Like, what's the part that makes it? Is it the Blood Tithe Harvester? Is it the Fables? Is it the Shieldreds? The answer is it's all of them. So, like, what are you going to hit here? And if you go too slowly, if you just go, you know, we'll hit Fable and reevaluate in 6 months. Like, you already lost so many players in that time when they get, you know, stomped in the ground by Rakdos. So,
yeah, it's
I don't know. Like,
it's a tough one. It really is. Like, it's much easier to ban when there's a clearly broken card that is causing the issues, or there's a combo that's causing the issues. But the issue that Standard has right now, I guess you could argue, if you want to argue something's broken, I guess it would be Fable the Mirror Breaker. Although really it's like a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 that every deck can play. Like, it's not broken in the way that Splinter Twin is, where your opponent does the thing and you just die, or, you know, something like that. It's not really, it's a fair card. It's just a really, really push fair card. So how do you even ban your way out of that? And I don't know what the answer is. Like, I think Fable's the easy one, and I think Fable 100% will get banned. I don't know if that actually solves anything though. Like, Mono Black was good before Rakdos was a thing and Grixis was a thing. Like, Fable would take a really good card out of a deck, but the rest of the shell's still so strong that I'm not sure it changes anything. And then if you go down the path of like, oh, ban Blood Tithe Harvester too, and Corpse Appraiser and Shieldred, that's kind of awkward as well, because none of those cards are broken. They just all are like,
and then you're like, oh, then we gotta take something from the white decks because we're afraid they'll take over the meta, so we'll have to ban Wandering Emperor, and then, you know, like, you're gonna have to ban like 20 cards.
And then you're just like, on second thought, maybe we should just rotate. Maybe we should just add rotation after all, if this is the path we're going down. And the last thought on this subject, I think the big problem, and you hinted at this earlier, I think the big problem is Wizards wants to fix Standard, but they either don't want to or can't make changes that are going to cost them money or make them less money. And I think the things that would really improve Standard are things that would end up making them less money. So that's kind of the sticking point here. Like, the changes that would actually matter, like, hey, let's give away Shieldreds as F&M promos. Hey, let's print dual lands at uncommon rather than rare, things like that. Like, those are going to, in a roundabout way, make less profits for Hasbro. So I'm not sure those options are even on the table, and I'm not sure you can fix the issues of standard without lowering the cost of standard, because I think the underlying issue is standard decks cost the same as Pioneer or Commander decks, and if that's the equation, why would I buy a standard deck when I can buy something that's going to last me for a much longer time, even with this change? So anyway, I'm super curious what y'all think about this change. What does it do for you personally? Because like I said before, I have heard some people say, oh, this is something that only bothers super enfranchised players or content creators. Like for me, I like that my cards last longer. Like that's a good thing. So I'm very curious where all of you are at and what you think. Is this going to make you play more standard or less standard? Is it, how is standard at your LGS? Is this going to help it come back? So definitely let us know in the comments what your personal feelings are and what this does for you and your relationships to standard. So anyway, that is the Pro Tour. That is the huge standard changes. We got more news this week, Richard. We have a entire new set that is releasing tomorrow. We got the full spoilers in one day after they were kind of leaked a few weeks early. That is Aftermath. I don't think we can actually go through individual spoilers. It would just be way too much and there's way too many cards. But I'm curious, Richard, what do you think of this set? Like, we see the whole set now. It's 50 cards. The theme is, if you haven't seen it, and you can check it out over on mtgpreviews.com, but the theme is essentially Planeswalkers. Some of them are now legendary creatures because they lost their spark. And that's, I guess, the story of this set. Really, it kind of feels like leftover cards from March of the Machines that could have been in March of the Machines, but they're in a separate set instead. But what do you think about Aftermath, Richard?
Wizards has figured out DLC. That's what's happened. They're like, look, this is part of the set. We'll just slice out 50 cards. We'll sell it as a new product, as an add-on product, and we'll charge people money. I'm not even sure why it's a standard set. It looks like a commander set to me. It's like so many legendary creatures. Most of the cards seem unplayable. There is a cycle of monocolored rares that look very strong in here, but I don't know. I'm not particularly excited about this. This just feels like, you know, when you brew a deck when the new set comes out, and then after a while, like, oh, I forgot about this card. Let me see if I can brew around it. Like that. That's it. You just found like a page in your binder of like random cards from March of the Machine that you forgot about, and here they are. And I don't know. They don't seem impactful.
Yeah.
Are you excited about this? It's just like, I don't know.
I mean, so I'm always excited for new Magic cards. So in a standard that's very stale, I'm excited that there's just new things I can try. So that part is exciting. I will say this, that it wasn't really what I expected. I was really expecting something more. As you said, this really does feel like some DLC, or to me, it reminded me of like how sometimes a band will like go in the recording studio and make an album, and then there'll be like leftover songs that didn't make the album for whatever reason, and then like 10 years later their label releases it as an album to make some extra money. That kind of feels like the Magic version of that. This is like if you
subscribe to the Wizards YouTube Premium, your Patreon, you get this. You get this.
I also think like the theme being legendary creatures is a tough sell, because this was like supposed to be pretty hyped and like these huge changes, and then the change ended up being, oh, Planeswalkers, some of them lost their spark and they're legendary creatures now. The problem is there's just so many legendary creatures these days that it doesn't feel especially innovative or exciting. It's just like, oh, like more of that. Like every other set has a ton of legendary creatures. So the fact that the name is Kiora or Karn or Nahiri or whatever on the legendary creature, I don't know. It still just kind of feels like more legendary creatures. I think there's a handful of cards that are interesting for standard. Obviously a ton of stuff that we'll see playing Commander, or you can build a Commander deck around. I don't know. So I guess it didn't meet my expectations, but I'm still excited to try some of the new cards just because I'm tired of playing with the Fables and the same old cards. So I'm excited for something new.
Which cards do you want to try to play that will do nothing in standard set?
Okay. So
going back to Shieldred. Give me your top one or two cards from Aftermath here.
Okay, so as far as just actually being good in standard, I think like Urborg Scavengers, a 3-mana 2/2 when it ETBs, you exile a card from a graveyard, or when it attacks and it gets a counter, and then if you exile a creature with an ability, you get that ability. I think that's a pretty good card when everyone's getting Atraxas in the graveyard. You just play this and get a 3/3 with a ton of mechanics. So I think that one's good. I think the 3-drop Angel Metropolis Reformer is actually designed to like line up with standard. Giving yourself hexproof means you can't get invoked despaired. Is a 2/3, it blocks the Fable of the Mirror token. It's good against aggro because if it takes damage, you gain life. So I feel like that's kind of designed for standard. As far as just like I'm excited to build around, I think Obnixilis Captive Kingpin is a really cool card with a unique ability where whenever your opponent takes exactly 1 damage or loses 1 life, it gets a counter and you get to exile a card and play it this turn. There's some combos for that. I'm excited to try like Nahiri Fortune Fury Equipment, a 6-mana 5/4 that has affinity for equipment, and then an ability when it attacks. But we got a lot of equipments that are also creatures in standard, thanks to like the Formiridan mechanic, the Reconfigure mechanic. Are these going to actually unseat the Rakdos, Grixis? No, I don't think there's any chance that these cards actually just like absolutely change the format, but I think they'll be fun to try. Like, I think it'll be cool to do a stream from them or whatever. What about you, Richard? Do any of these cards stick out as something that you're excited to play?
I want to slot. There's a 2-drop black creature with menace, and when it hits someone, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and if it has 4 +1/+1 counters, you get to tutor.
Oh, yes. Yara's
that
Sword.
one is extremely strong and it's going to be super annoying. Arnie is a 3-mana 3/3 in red. When a creature you control attacks or a creature enters the battlefield and you control attacking, you may pay 2, and if you do, you put a creature card with mana value less than that creature's mana value from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. So a really aggressive red creature, I think, can see some play there. And then all the legendaries are like whatever. Like legendaries are a tough sell in standard for me, especially since we have so many.
Yeah.
But I think that black creature is going to be really strong. I don't know if it's stronger than Bloodtithe Harvester, but it's these cards that Wizards love sprinting. Like, you have removal now or you die, right? It like snowballs out of control quite quickly. So
that card, yeah. It reminds me a little bit of Robber of the Rich, where if you drop that turn 2 and you're on the play, that can get out of control pretty quickly with the snowball aspect once you start getting in those hits. So yeah, that one.
Well, it has menace, so even if they have blockers, you just remove 1 creature or whatever, and you can go to town.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, it'll be interesting. I'm curious to see how this set sells. That is the biggest thing. I think I've seen a lot of people say they're buying singles and not buying boxes, based in large part on the leaked box openings that made it look like there's a lot of duplication in the set. People are kind of medium on. Curious if people actually buy this or if this is something that kind of ends up flopping. So I guess we'll find out soon because it's supposed to be coming out this week. It comes out tomorrow digitally, and I believe the end of the week you can buy boxes in paper. But all right, we got a couple other topics we got to hit up real quickly. So we got a new secret lair alert. Of course, that's not a surprise, but this one's kind of special. We have our second ever full commander deck secret lair drop. This is something we've only seen once before with the coin flip deck. This is a double-faced card theme deck. There's 5 cards with new like secret lair art and then a bunch of reprints to round out the deck. It's called From Cute to Brew. It's thematically a little bit all over the place because it's double-faced card theme. So looking at it as a commander deck, it's a little weird because there's just a ton of MDFCs. I don't know how synergistic the deck will actually be, but the deck has some pretty valuable cards. I'm curious, Richard, deck's going for $150. I added up the cost of the cards if you buy the cheapest versions on Goldfish, and it was a little bit under or a little bit over $300. Is this worth buying? Like, would you recommend people to try to snag this commander secret lair drop?
Nah. I mean, if you want the art, it's already down to 260 sets since you've done your calculations.
Dropping.
This deck is like the coin flip deck actually looked like a deck. This is like one of our Clash like theme like heavily themed decks where like it doesn't make any sense, but like that's all you had. So it's like all DFCs and stuff, and very little synergy, very little, I don't know, cohesiveness, I would say. It's a weird deck, so I would only get it if you want the special art of Avacyn, Esika, Nicol Bolas, Bloodline Keeper, and Westvale Abbey. But $150 is pretty expensive.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to play this deck. Like, unlike a lot of actual commander precons we get, which are pretty good out of the box, or at least pretty functional, this one does just seem like a pile of cards around a theme, without much actually holding it together. So I don't know if I'd actually want to play with the deck, but I do think there are some cool reprints in there. So as far as if you want the cards or you want the new versions of these cards, I think it's a fair deal price wise. But as far as buying it to play out of the box, I would probably buy a normal precon, which I think is just a little bit more built for that. So finally, we got one other big piece of news, something we've been wondering about for a minute, which is Wizards announced how the ring mechanic actually works during the Pro Tour this weekend. So if you remember, we're getting a Lord of the Rings set soon. That's the next big set to come out. We had seen a bunch of cards that said the ring tempts you. So when you ETB, the ring tempts you or deal combat damage, whatever. But we didn't know what that actually meant. So Wizards finally revealed this. Richard, I'm going to read this, and here's how it works. And then tell me if this is a good mechanic. So the ring is actually 4 steps that you go through. Every time the ring tempts you, one of your cards tell you that the ring tempts you, you're going to essentially move along this little chart, almost like going through a dungeon until you get to the final level, which is the 4th level. And when the ring tempts you, you get to choose a creature that's your ring bearer, and that's the creature that's going to have the abilities. So essentially, you play a card that says the ring tempts you. The first level is your ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. So when the ring tempts you, get to choose a creature that gets that ability. The next time the ring tempts you, you're going to add on the ability, whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card, and you can choose another creature to be the ring bearer. You can only ever have one ring bearer, but whenever the ring tempts you, you can choose another creature to be your ring bearer. The third level is, whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, the creature's controller sacks it at the end of combat. And the last one is, whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. So if you have the ring tempt you 4 times, you get all the way to your end, your ring-bearing creature will have all 4 of those abilities. It can't be blocked by creatures with power greater. It loots when it attacks. If it gets blocked, the blocker is sacrificed at the end of combat. And if it hits your opponent, each opponent loses 3 life. In typical Lord of the Rings fashion, that's a lot of text to describe what it seems like a relatively simple mechanic. Richard, what do you make of this as a Lord of the Rings expert?
What? Like, what? Wait, where's the downside? Like, this doesn't feel like the ring at all. And I think there was a post on Maro's blog asking, like, why is there no downside? And he said when there was a downside, people wouldn't play it. Yeah. They probably made the downside too harsh. I don't know. Like, I think the one ring, you know, the card that draws you cards and you lose life, people will definitely play in Commander. That is a downside. So, I don't know. This is, like, needlessly complicated for what looks to be a weak mechanic, and then flavor-wise, it doesn't even look like it's on point. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of disappointed by this. What do you think, Seth? Is this a good mechanic? Like, do you think this is strong?
So I'm not a Lord of the Rings expert, so I've seen other people bring up the flavor stuff, which I'll defer to people who actually know Lord of the Rings, so I assume the flavor is a little bit wonky, that there's no downside. As far as power level, it doesn't seem very strong to me. I guess it's like... So I guess the exception would be, so far we've seen a couple of cards that care about how many times the ring has tempted you, like the Frodo that we got. If you level it up and you have been tempted by the ring at least 4 times and you hit someone, they're going to lose the game. So maybe there's like a deck you could build around that in Commander or something. But as far as this being like a new modern playable mechanic or something, based on the cards that we've seen so far, I'm pretty skeptical that this is actually a strong mechanic, which I guess is especially troubling because if it's not strong, I can deal with not strong if Wizards is like, we just wanted to make the most flavorful Lord of the Rings set ever. And like, we, threw power level aside just to knock the flavor out of the park. But considering the flavor people are upset about this as well, what does this mechanic offer if it's not good or powerful, and it's also kind of a miss flavor wise? That's a bad place to be, right? For a key mechanic in a new set.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of disappointed in this mechanic. I think the one ring card is a way better representation of the ring, and it's also needlessly complex. Like, you gotta like explain this to everyone. Like, the card has a backside explaining how to play the card. Like that's how complicated this thing is. And the front side is like this emblem thing that's like not really an emblem, and I don't know. It's complicated, and I don't see the point of it. It didn't really add much flavor. It's not really strong. Like, couldn't they just make it a dungeon or something and just call it a day? Like, I don't know. Can they reuse a mechanic we already had?
I will say I'm a little worried after the initiative just like broke Legacy that I'm going to say this mechanic isn't good. And then next thing you know, like Modern is dominated by Frodo and the ring mechanic. And that's just like the best thing going. So I guess you never know with these wonky commander focused mechanics. I will say the complicatedness and wordiness of it, that's kind of on flavor, right? For Lord of the Rings. That's my experience reading or watching Lord of the Rings. Like, my God, this is just like way too long, way too many words. And the mechanic kind of nails that part.
Rings,
so
the card would have like one line of rules text and then like 60 lines of flavor text. You'd be like, that's Lord of the Rings right there.
I will say, I think it'll play fine. Like, it's a lot to take in at first, but I think once you play with it, it's going to be like relatively intuitive. I just don't know if outside of Commander, it's really going to see play anywhere. Like, unless there's some even stronger support cards than we've seen so far that really reward you for being tempted by the ring. I wouldn't think that just in a generic sense, this is going to unseat Ragavans and Furies and so forth to be an actual like staple mechanic that's competitive in Modern. Maybe a good against the odds deck, maybe a good Commander deck, but that's what I'm mostly thinking about with this card at this point. So anyway, boy, that was a lot to get through. Any other thoughts on anything, Richard, before we maybe hit up a Fishmail before the end of the cast?
No, we can go straight to Fishmail. If you have questions, you can send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air. Lots of questions about Fable, the Mirror Breaker banning, and Standard being 3 years. I think we covered most of that. Here's a question from I Blackmail Lands. New Elspeth is flying without the counter. Is paper functionality just a second order concern now?
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean,
you become an angel and you get flying, right? Like there's multiple modifications happening that are not represented in anything.
So you do get 2+1/+1 counters, which isn't the best representation because you could get counters in other ways. But I think in a lot of situations, that's a bit of a reminder. But yeah, I was surprised that it didn't say like a flying counter or something, especially since like we already have the ability to put mechanic or keyword counters on things. So I was kind of shocked that it wasn't a counter to represent that ability. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fine in digital, but it is the more of those cards you get, the worse paper becomes little by little. Like this Elspeth isn't going to break anything or be a problem. People get by. But if we get to the point where you have a deck full of cards like this, that's a lot to try to keep track of without much help from the cards themselves.
Yeah, actually curious. Did this ever happen at the Pro Tour? Did they have to like print a little slip of paper that said angel and then flying?
You think people played a white deck and an Elspeth at the Pro Tour, Richard? Come on now. It's Fable's world. Elspeth's just living in it.
All right, last question. Barry Wright. Proxies are pretty accepted in the Magic community, but frowned upon in the Pokemon community. Why do you think that is?
Ooh. Well, so I don't know much about the Pokemon community, so I can't really speak to why the Pokemon community is against proxies. I don't know how expensive Pokemon is, if that plays into it at all. I know, so proxies were not always accepted in Magic. Proxies were always kind of a fringe thing, or even in some cases a frowned upon thing, until recently with Commander becoming such a popular format. So I think that the broad acceptance of proxies is a combination of a casual format like Commander, an unsanctioned format, becoming the most popular way to play paper Magic, and the cost of Magic cards continuing to rise because of the reserve list, or even just how Wizards prints some new cards like Sheoldred. So I think it's a combination of those two effects that have essentially pushed the community in that direction. And then I know it was the 30th anniversary edition was Wizards printing their own proxies that was like kind of the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people, when once they saw that, they were like, well, if Wizards just going to print proxies and sell them for $1,000, I guess I might as well be accepting of other people printing their own proxies because Wizards is doing it themselves. But what do you think, Richard? Do you know anything about the Pokemon end of things?
I mean, Pokemon decks are usually a lot cheaper.
Okay.
And they're also a lot more accessible. I think Magic players accept proxies because we're out of money. That's essentially, it's like if you have 5 commander decks, are you really buying 5 Teferi's protections or like 5 underground seas or whatever? Like you just, like that's impractical. So you proxy that, and then or people will understand that, hey, this is a reserve list card. You don't want to spend like $3,000 for Tabernacle or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm gonna proxy one. So I do think it's more accepted because people have multiple decks and cards are inaccessible. I do think it's frowned upon when you push the power level of your group with proxies. Like for example, everyone's playing casual Magic and you're like, I just proxied up the Cradle and killed you all in turn 2, right? Like I think people be like, what? But I think if people are like, yeah, I have a Teferi's Pro, it's in my other deck, and here's the proxy for it, people don't really care. So it's interesting, and I think it's because Magic is so expensive. Everyone like, yeah, I get you, bro. I don't want to use a day's salary or whatever to make this deck, right? I get it. It's fine, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird dynamic that we're like, yeah, we're gonna play this card or play this card game, but we can't buy all the pieces, so we'll just use pieces of paper and make up our own pieces. So yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I think that's all the time we have for Fishmail. So if you have future questions, send them to @MTGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air.
And I believe that brings us to the end of episode 432 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So, Richard, thanks for hanging out. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And we'll be back next week to talk about whatever goes on in the world of Magic. So, until then, have a lovely week, everyone. And this is a crew signing out.